Hello and welcome to the Redmen TV. I'm very excited to say I've got James Pearce from The Athletic joining me today to wrap up Liverpool's transfer window. James, thank you very much for joining me. I know you've got a busy day on, so it's a pleasure to have you.
No worries. Good to speak to you, Chris.
So let's get straight into it. What did you make of Liverpool's transfer business this window?
Yeah, I thought it was a very, very decent window for the club. I think probably for a long time, like a lot of supporters, we probably wondered whether key areas would be addressed. And I think we were probably all waiting for that kind of real show of ambition. And, although the early signing of Tsimikas in the window certainly ticked the box, I think everyone would have acknowledged that Liverpool needed cover at left back. It was never going to be one of those deals that really set the pulses racing. But I think in the space of that 48 hours in the middle of September, to get the Thiago deal done and then bring in Jota, two really exciting signings that will enhance the squad and Liverpool's chances of winning trophies this season. So of course, you had the painful setback of what happened at Villa Park, and people all quite rightly say, well, should Liverpool have signed a centre half? Personally, I think probably yes. I think they are probably a centre half short, and then you've obviously got the discussion around the reserve goalkeeper that has been brought into focus because of events at Villa Park. But overall, I'd say it was a very successful window for Liverpool.
What did you? Are you surprised that Liverpool kind of broke the mould for the Thiago signing, James?
Probably yes and no in terms of because it was just so out of keeping with the way that Liverpool have done their business to get to this point. I think I remember checking back and writing it in one of my pieces that I think the only player over the age of 26 that Klopp had paid money for was Ragnar Klavan, and clearly that was a kind of a stopgap signing to fill a gap in the squad. So, but I think that the longer it went on, the more you thought, well, hang on a minute, Thiago is clearly absolutely desperate to come to Liverpool. He really wants to work with Jurgen Klopp, and he was worth making an exception for. I think that was the big thing, that ultimately, all of the hierarchy at Liverpool were in agreement that yes, we don't usually spend this kind of money or pay this kind of wages and give a 4-year contract to someone who's 29, but very rarely do you get an opportunity like this to sign someone who is probably in the top 3 or 4 in his position in world football. So, it was a deal that ultimately I was delighted that they got over the line, and I think it just gives another kind of dimension to this Liverpool team.
Yeah, I noticed in one of your articles, actually on The Athletic, you used a quote from Pep Lijnders, which I thought was really interesting. And he says he will make sure the team evolves and make the next step. It is important for the team to stay unpredictable. Now, I'm not saying that Aston Villa is Liverpool being unpredictable here, James, but what do you actually think that how do you think the Thiago signing will make us unpredictable?
Yeah, I think what Pep Lijnders was referring to was, I think when people think of Liverpool and the damage they did so many teams en route to winning the title, certainly attacking wise, you think of the front three and you think of the quality deliveries and ammunition provided from Andy Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold from wide areas. And I think if you were being ultra critical, you'd say, did Liverpool really hurt teams that often through the centre of the pitch with those defence splitting passes? If you look at the goals and assists from that central trio that Klopp tends to operate with in his favoured 4-3-3. So I think that was what he meant, was that suddenly I think when you've got someone like Thiago with that, I think we saw in the space of 45 minutes at Stamford Bridge, just what an unbelievable passer of the ball he is, and always looking to make things happen and pick holes in defences. Of course, he's had the setback of testing positive for COVID, and he's going to need a bit of time, I'm sure, to fully adjust to the style. But yeah, I think over the course of this season, I think Pep Lijnders is right. I think it will give Liverpool, a real elite, another avenue in which they can hurt teams.
And let's move on to Diogo Jota, obviously a player who's come in now. He's had a good start to his Liverpool career, scored last week against Arsenal, obviously. What is it you think that Liverpool saw in Diogo Jota that made them go out and spend a huge amount of money? You know, more expensive than any of the other front three players.
Yeah, right. I think, you know, in the way that Thiago was clearly a break from the policy, I think you'd say Jota was well and truly in keeping with the way that Liverpool have tended to do business in terms of, you know, he's performed at the top level. You know, he knows the Premier League inside out. But I think Liverpool also feel that there is huge room there for development, and I think, you know, it does remind me in a way to the Sadio Mane deal in terms of, I remember, you know, doing stuff that day, writing stuff on the day that Liverpool signed Sadio Mane, and the number of people replying saying, you know, that's a crazy amount of money for someone like him. You know, he's not consistent enough. You know, there weren't too many other big clubs sniffing around Sadio Mane, and I think they see similar qualities in Jota in terms of, you know, clearly Pep Lijnders pushed pretty hard for him to be the one that they ultimately went after and got signed, because he knew him well from his early days in Portuguese football. Klopp had admired him a lot in the games against Wolves last season. I think his work ethic and his kind of tactical intelligence as well. And also, I think Klopp loves versatile players and the fact that he can play across the front line. So yeah, you're right. I think it is a lot of money, but I think that the other thing to factor in was the structure of the deal, where Wolves were prepared to only take about £4.5 million in 12 months, which for Liverpool, with the current cash flow issues with coronavirus, was absolutely crucial. And that was certainly one of the reasons why they ultimately, you know, went away from Ismaila Sarr to Jota, because they just felt that Watford's demands for Sarr, which were, you know, £40 million guaranteed, rising to 50 million, were just too excessive.
And let's talk about Liverpool then in general, because I don't know whether a lot of people have spoken about this, James, to be honest, but Liverpool have said all summer long, correct me if I'm wrong here, mate, that, you know, it's a sell to buy. And that's what it was going to be. Do you think Liverpool were overstating it, or do you think Liverpool have made a little bit of a mistake towards the back end of the window in not actually being able to get rid of the players that they probably already thought they'd be able to get rid of for money and recoup some of that money that they've spent on the likes of Thiago and Jota? Now, don't get me wrong, I understand the structure of the deal works in Liverpool's favour for both Thiago and Jota, but it looks to me like Liverpool really wanted to maybe get rid of a Shaqiri and a Grujic for the money that was right, and that they were kind of maybe reliant on that coming in.
I think it's certainly fair to say Liverpool expected a couple more players to go before the deadline than actually did, but I think, you know, my understanding is that they weren't reliant on selling players. That those two deals, the structure of the deals for Thiago and for Jota, meant that they were under no pressure to sell. And I think we saw that from the way that they didn't buckle and suddenly reduce their demands in the 48 hours before the window shut, because you know, they stuck to their guns. And they said, you know, Shaqiri valued at 20 million, not available for loan. Grujic, I think, you know, they would have taken 17, 18 million off Werder Bremen. If Werder Bremen had been, you know, had accepted those terms, they wouldn't. And the same with Harry Wilson and Burnley. You know, they turned down, I think, 12 million, potentially rising to 15 for Wilson. So, you know, if Liverpool were that desperate for the money, they would have caved in and offloaded those players, you know, or even taken kind of loan fees and just said goodbye to them for a season. But, you know, the word all the way along was that Liverpool had these stringent valuations, and if they weren't going to be met, then in a season like this, where we've seen already, you know, Liverpool have lost 3 players to COVID in the last week, Klopp is kind of breaking with tradition a little bit, and with wanting to operate with a bigger squad than he usually does. Because he knows there are so many obstacles to clear, you know, especially with COVID and the fact that the schedule is going to be so intense.
And what about Bruce? Obviously goes out for a huge sum of money to Sheffield United, for a lad who hasn't played a lot of minutes for us. Do you think Liverpool wanted to get rid of Brewster, or do you think that was, had it been a different season in a different world, Liverpool maybe would have held on for a bit longer? Or do you just think it was a case of he maybe doesn't fit the system and he can go on and flourish and have a good career somewhere else?
Yeah, I think there was a whole load of factors. I think certainly the financial climate, I think, played a part. I think that was, it was a huge sum of money, in my book, for someone who's got a lot of potential, but has never played a minute of Premier League football yet. And I really hope Ryan Brewster goes on to absolutely flourish in the top flight. But I think that money was very, very tempting. I think probably the biggest factor was Ryan Brewster's desire to move on himself. I think, clearly he left Chelsea to come to Liverpool because he was desperate to have a pathway. He then very nearly left Liverpool before he signed his first professional contract to go to the Bundesliga because, again, he wanted to play. And I think he's looked at it and thought, well, hang on a minute, with Firmino, with Minamino, with Riki still around, with Jota coming in, where exactly do I fit? And I think it was telling as well what Klopp said in pre-season about, he said, no one ever questions Ryan Brewster's finishing quality. It's probably those other sides of his game that need to evolve for him to really fit what we look for in a centre forward. And and that's no slight on him. He's a young player who still is still learning his trade. And I think Klopp would have happily kept him around and helped iron out those rough edges. But he also understood that, having lost 14, 15 months of his career to an injury in his kind of teenage years, and then had a real taste of senior football out at Swansea, that he was just absolutely desperate to play and to make a name for himself and to put down some roots. And so I think all parties in the end just thought, you know what, this is probably the best, for all concerned. The fact that Ryan Brewster gets his regular spot in the Premier League, but Liverpool, get a lot of money for him, and they also have the added security of knowing that, if he does light the place up, over the next 3 years, they've got that buyback clause that they can trigger if they want to bring him back to Anfield.
Do you reckon that'll happen?
I think it's difficult to say because Liverpool haven't confirmed exactly what those numbers are. I mean, I think probably common sense tells you it's around that 35 to 40 million pound mark, because it's got to be a significant increase on what Sheffield United paid just to kind of make it kind of worth their while buying him in the first place. But it's obviously not going to be a crazy amount of money, because otherwise Liverpool, the buyback option wouldn't be of much value to them. So I think the other important thing to factor in is not only the Liverpool going to have to want to bring him back at that fee, but Brewster will actually have to want to come back himself, because it may well be that he puts down some roots at Sheffield United, becomes their first choice number 9, banging them in, and still doesn't see that happening if he was to come back to Liverpool. So, but it's going to be really interesting to watch his progress. I certainly think Liverpool have put these buyback clauses into deals in the past. I think you think of probably Jordan Ibe and Brad Smith. I don't think we probably ever thought that they were ever going to be triggered. I think this one with Ryan Brewster is probably a bit more realistic.
James, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'm going to let you go now because I know you've got a busy day, and then I'm sure you're going to want to breathe during the international break, because if you've had a few weeks like we've had, it's been a very difficult one. But it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you again. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Listen, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to drop a like on the video, subscribe to Redmen TV, and check out James over on The Athletic, some of the best football writing in the world. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Ta-ra.